Welcome back. Senate Democrats failing to pass legislation to reopen the government again yesterday for the 10th time. Looks like this government shutdown stretches into next week now. A House-passed bill to keep the military paid while the doors stay closed also failing in the Senate procedural vote yesterday. House Speaker Mike Johnson warning service members will miss their paycheck at the end of the month if there is no movement in the upper chamber. Sources telling me the Democrats have agreed to keep this shutdown in place at least until after the planned No Kings protest happening tomorrow in Washington. Joining me now is Wisconsin Congressman Bryan Steil. He is the chairman of the House Administration Committee. Mr. Chairman, great to see you.
Thanks for having me in.
Thank you so much for being here. So what has been the impact of this shutdown, and do you see any end in sight?
The impact is continuing to grow. Some federal employees, including, for example, United States Capitol police officers, didn't receive their full paycheck because of the Chuck Schumer shutdown. President Trump has come in and done some amazing, extraordinary measures to make sure that our troops are paid and other absolutely essential federal employees are receiving their paychecks. But these extraordinary measures are only able to go for so long. It's imperative that the Senate changes course and opens the government. But Chuck Schumer's beholden to the radical base of the Democratic Party. You can look at the mayoral race in New York City or Minneapolis, or look at the rally that's going to take place in cities across the country this weekend to understand where the base of the Democratic Party is, how radical they are, and that's what's driving the agenda of Democrats in the United States Senate.
Why? How did this happen?
Well, over time, the Democrats and socialism has reared its ugly head. And I think for too long we looked the other way as a nation, not recognizing that when Democratic socialists were running for office at the local level, they were plotting this agenda to absolutely take control of the Democratic Party. It shouldn't be lost that the mayoral candidate in New York was a sitting state house legislator building his craft to advance that agenda. The same is taking place in Minneapolis, where it's a state house representative who is running for mayor to drive that city even further to the left.
Yeah.
And so we have to stand up against the socialist agenda that the Democratic Party is driving, and this anti-America rally that's going to take place across the country will give a first row seat to plenty of people to understand where the Democratic agenda is in this country and why we have to overcome it.
By the way, Mamdani, who is the socialist in New York that you're referring to, he's up in the polls. He's at 52%, so he's got a following. But I want to get your take on something else you've been working on, and that is these proxy advisors, ISS and Glass Lewis. They basically make recommendations to investors if there's a deal, if there's something happening at the company. They make recommendations to shareholders, and oftentimes shareholders follow that advice. What are you working on?
These are very little-known companies that have a huge impact on corporate America. ISS and Glass Lewis are a duopoly that controls 95% of the proxy advisor markets. They're driving forward their radical agenda. They're foreign-owned entities advising U.S. publicly traded companies in how their shares should be voted. Many Americans have pension funds or 401ks, and often those funds are voted on their behalf by their asset managers. Those asset managers are far too often relying on these two companies for advice. And if we're concerned, as I am, about the woke corporate agenda, the ESG agenda, it is in large part being driven by these companies that have massive conflicts of interest. I have legislation to actually break that up, to end the conflict of interest, put these folks under regulation, show the American people what is actually taking place at these two entities. I hope to see that legislation move forward in the months ahead.
This is very important, and business cares about this because CEOs of businesses don't understand why shareholders vote a certain way, but it's because of that, the influence from these proxy advisors. I did not realize they were foreign-owned. How is that possible?
Well, because everyone was looking the other way. They're not household names, but they actually drive forward the corporate agenda in America more than I think most folks realize.
You're right.
And so the asset managers over time have had more and more power in voting your retirement shares in particular. And as ISS and Glass Lewis have gotten bigger and bigger and more powerful and concentrated 95% of the proxy advisor market, their say goes a long way.
Yeah.
And so they have massive conflicts of interest. On one side of the ledger, they're advising shareholders on how to vote on corporate America. On the other side of the ledger, they're actually taking money from these corporations to provide advice and counsel. That is a massive conflict of interest that isn't allowed in other obvious areas such as the accounting industry.
Yeah.
And so we have to prevent this type of conflict of interest and actually disclose it for what it is and address the fact that these two entities are driving the ESG agenda in the United States of America.
It's very important to make the point that this is Germany, this is Canada, these are foreign-owned companies. I'll be watching that for sure. I know business cares a lot about that. Let me get your take on the news of the day. President Trump is going to host Ukrainian President Zelensky at the White House today. I spoke with the president yesterday at the White House after his call with Vladimir Putin. And the issue of these Tomahawk missiles came up once again. The president told me, look, we need Tomahawk missiles as well, but Zelensky wants the U.S. to sell them Tomahawk missiles. These are very severe missiles that go, 1,000 feet? I mean, what is your take on this in terms of Putin pushing back, telling America don't do it? I thought Medvedev, the president of Russia, the other day, I felt like it was a threat. He said, listen, the U.S. should not send Tomahawks to Ukraine because we're not going to be able to know what's a Tomahawk and what's a nuclear. And, you know, we'll have to react. And so that was, to me, a veiled threat about nuclear armament. Your thoughts?
President Trump has done a great job driving peace through strength. We just saw that take place as ultimately Hamas has surrendered to Israel. And President Trump did that by showing strong support to Israel. Peace through strength works. President Trump has also shown great strength in supporting Ukraine to make sure that we're standing up against this unjust Russian invasion. And showing that allows us to get to peace in Ukraine and Russia. The other thing the president, I don't think gets enough credit for, is actually getting our European allies to the table to up their defense spending.
Absolutely.
For far too long, they're below their 2% obligation under the NATO treaty. They now are finally moving towards 5%. The president should get more credit for the fact that he's getting Europe to stand up to do their job in their own backyard. I think when we look back over time, that is the biggest action that people will give President Trump credit for.
Yeah, it's a big deal. By the way, Poland was at 5% for a while. We spoke with the president of Poland recently about this. But you're right. The European nations have taken the cue from President Trump, and that is a big deal. Congressman, good to see you this morning. Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll be watching your work. Bryan Steil here in our D.C. studios. We'll be right back.